You know, there are times where I question if reading Berserk is good for my emotional state of mind. Right? This chapter was, I don't really know how to put it. Well, to start off, I was completely wrong in my predictions. Again, I thought this was going to be more of an exposition that we see from Casca and Guts, but Casca and Guts are quite literally the ones who speak the least in this entire chapter outside of the Skull Knight, of course. And the fact that I know there won't be another chapter till a very long time is just more upsetting. Despite me being one of the faces of Berserk on YouTube, this is only like my second hiatus. It literally, the clips that Guts and Casca went through, for us, the reader of Berserk, it's hiatus. But before I get into the chapter, again, if you are new to the channel, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, and turn on the bell notifications. That way you're notified if a new video pops up on some of your favorite content and all of that good stuff. And without further ado, cue the intro. Berserk Chapter 360. Now, on the title page, it says, at the end of the journey, what becomes of the two who were to be reunited? I don't know. You tell me. The chapter starts off with Casca drinking something in bed, and Farnese tells her to take it easy, don't gulp it down. Casca apologizes for making a scene and all of that, but shortly after, Casca seems like she's going to enter another panic attack as she says she's reminded of something of the old days, that she's suddenly dragged back into that place, and that there's a dread shadow that covers over her. And so that gives us a little bit of clarification, because she doesn't say specifically Guts. She says when something of the old days, or something reminds her of the old days, she's instantly dragged back into the eclipse. And so I believe that can only be further confirmed if she sees like Griffith or Rickard and all of that. But then again, by the time I think she sees those two characters in the future, she would have already maybe completed whatever mental rehab she needs. And so it is extremely heartbreaking, because Guts isn't really at fault for anything that happened during the eclipse. In fact, Guts was the one who was trying to save her, but instead he got pinned down, got his eye gouged out, had to cut off his own arm while she was being violated. Again, it's just very upsetting to see Guts get the short end of the stick. But then again, it is Berserk. What did I expect? As Casca begins to enter this panic attack-like state, she is then instantly put to sleep, therefore her mind isn't stressed out. And at that moment, Shirka and Farnese are told to go and return to their studies that she will be taken care of. Of course, Farnese is extremely hesitant because she's always been like this mother, older sister role to Casca, or should I say Elaine, during this later half of Berserk. But as Farnese tries to leave, we then see Casca gripping onto a piece of her clothing. And shortly after, the Elf Queen says she trusts greatly in you, doesn't she? A security blanket, perhaps. And that scene, as Casca is holding on to Farnese's clothing, and Farnese seems a little hesitant as she says she ... and then I'm not ... kind of revealed two things about not only Casca but Farnese. Or well, one thing about Casca and one thing about Farnese. And the thing about Casca is pretty obvious. She seems to have grown this dependency on Farnese because of all the time Farnese and her spent together. Farnese was again pretty much Casca's caretaker during this later half of Berserk. And so Casca, even now holding on to her after just recently about to have another panic attack, just shows how much she's really kind of regressed mentally and has kind of grown dependent on this security blanket. As well as seeing how far Farnese has come as a character. Before her being this sadist, masochist, just evil person, to now being as much as a security blanket for somebody like Casca, says a lot about her growth throughout the story. But as we get into the rest of the chapter, we see Serpico standing behind a tree. Yo, Serpico, my guy, you're my favorite character. You can't This man is quite literally standing behind a tree looking like the most bro, what are you doing? Like, I know Serpico is all about Lady Farnese, but the way you see him in that page, he's like, Lady Farnese at last. I'm sorry, I found that a little bit humorous. And so as we continue on, it seems as if Farnese is about to learn how to do magic. And so we continue on through the rest of the pages, and literally it's just a bunch of magic training for Shirka and Farnese. And when it comes to Farnese, something I should point out is the fact how apparently she's doing all of this stuff that took the rest of the students a few years, or if not at least a year, to master, but if not, Farnese has been able to do it in a much shorter amount of time. And as we approach near the end of the chapter, we see Farnese wanting to learn the ability to kind of mend and heal somebody's soul. And look, man, just how nice of a person Farnese is here, just not thinking of herself again, wanting to heal Casca, as well as knowing she has like this massive crush on Guts. It's like, look, just hear me out. If Casca and Guts don't end up together, You cannot tell me Farnese isn't the #1 candidate. And don't even say Shirka. She's like 12, you sickos. And so before I get into the end part of the chapter, which is probably going to be what I named the title of this video, I must say it's a good chapter, right? We get to see some magical abilities from Farnese. We get to see kind of Casca, or at least some of the reasoning as to why Casca gets triggered. A minor explanation, but at least somewhat it hints at it just not being Guts. But of course, because of hiatus, this doesn't, I don't want to say chapters like these seem underwhelming, but it is the truth, I would have to say, because the last chapter was huge, and I think this chapter was just a slight more added to the last chapter. It didn't really confirm anything completely in the last chapter, and so now we'll get into the last few pages of this chapter, and I'll explain why I said what I just said. So in the last pages, we see Guts on a cliff swinging his sword, and as he swings his sword, we see Guts sweating with a face of slight distress. Of course, right after, we see that it's because he has Casca on his mind, and he asks himself quite appropriately, what do I do now? And guess who shows up at the end with some mystical, depressing, not helping the mood like stuff? The good old Skull Knight. What did we expect from the Skull Knight at this point? But I do want to take some time to kind of talk about what the Skull Knight said, because I already know people are going to take this and run with it. The Skull Knight pulls up behind Guts and he says, you bear witness to the end of your journey. And then the next page we see, it is not always a happy thing. Now, I don't know if he's talking about Guts' entire journey as a person, and therefore, you know, he's talking about like Guts is nearing the end of his life, or he's just talking about the end of his journey when it comes to Casca. Because when I've talked about the Skull Knight before, in real life Ryan has kind of brought it up, it's very well possible that Guts and the Skull Knight can conflict on as to where they should go next. For instance, Guts might want to stay and help Casca more, versus the Skull Knight, who's definitely more of a causality tard, if you will, just because I couldn't think of a better term. But the Skull Knight is probably a lot more focused on defeating the God Hand and possibly taking the Moonlight Boy out of the picture. So if this is referring to Guts' entire journey, as in the whole of Berserk, then, you know, that could definitely mean a lot of things, but I don't really want to get into that just because there are too many factors that play in. And I don't want to push people to take this and run with it, you know, because again, there's just so much to be determined when it comes to Berserk and the ending of it. All I will say is that if this is referring to the overall story of Berserk, then I was somebody who believed that it was possible for Guts and Casca to have like this happy ending, but then again, the most realistic outcome was a bittersweet ending. And so I'm leaning more towards the Skull Knight is referring to his journey with Guts, or not his journey with Guts, but if not Guts' journey with Casca and all of that. Because right before the Skull Knight says this, we see Guts thinking about Casca, and Guts is asking, what do I do now? And realistically, what can he do now? Casca can't even look at him. He doesn't really have any purpose to be in Elfheim. So this could very much be the Skull Knight taking advantage of the situation and saying, hey, it is what it is. You gotta move on. We have work to do. And so if that is the case, then Guts could be parting from Elfheim, leaving the group behind, and going with Skull Knight. Now just look at this last page. Imagine you see these two pulling up to your place to whoop your butt, bro. And if the Skull Knight still has the Sword of Resonance, then man, you really don't want to mess with him unless you're like Femto and you can just so happen to bend space. My goodness. I don't really know how to give my thoughts on just one isolated chapter, especially when said chapter doesn't really have much exposition, right? Plus, perfectly breaking down and analyzing a chapter using previous chapters is kind of Spired's thing, and he's really good at it, so I'll let my boy do his thing. So yeah, Mira, I know you're not listening to this, but if anybody can manage to get in contact with Mira, tell him thank you for a new chapter. It's very much appreciated. But yeah, I honestly don't know what to make of this chapter. You know, it is new. I'm probably gonna have to reread it a few times, see if I kind of missed anything. But what I will say is, instead of just answering some of the questions I may have had in the previous chapter, it's just leaving us with more questions as to what will happen next. And it seems like Mira is really good at making us ask that question, which is why hiatus seems to be so painful. Do I still think that Guts and Casca will end up together? Honestly, it's an I don't know, right? It all depends on what Mira is trying to do with the story and how he wants to wrap up Guts' character or his journey with Casca. Because realistically, Guts did all that he could in his power. He can't control the fact that Casca has PTSD flashbacks of the eclipse. And so, is it possible for Guts now to make the same mistake he might have done before in the Black Swordsman arc? where he left Casca for 2 years to embark on his quest of revenge, because if the Skull Knight's trying to tell Guts he needs to leave, I think Guts will kind of deny the Skull Knight. But yeah, if you're new to the channel, again, make sure you subscribe, turn on the bell notifications, that way you're notified when a new video pops up on some of your favorite Berserk content. As well as make sure you hit that like button and comment, as well as be ready because me and Real Life Ryan will be doing a collab on his channel about this chapter this weekend. So yeah, as always, this has been The Masked Man. Hope everyone has a blessed rest of the day, and peace.